Sarah Denton's heart pounded like a drum in her chest as she stepped onto the cracked asphalt of Westfield Elementary's deserted playground, the early morning fog curling like ghostly fingers around the rusty swings and faded hopscotch squares, her breath visible in the chilly spring air as the weight of the unsolved mystery pressed down on her like a stone. The school was a place once filled with laughter, innocent chatter, and the carefree steps of children, but today it felt hollow, haunted by echoes of something sinister lurking beneath its surface. Sarah tightened her grip on the leash of Noro, her loyal canine partner, whose keen eyes scanned every shadow and every corner, the dog's low growl, a warning that they were not alone in this quiet place. The disappearance of Eloise Marin, a bright and curious 9-year-old, had shaken the community to its core. But what haunted Sarah the most was the creeping suspicion that this was only one thread in a much darker tapestry woven through the history of Westfield. As she led Noro toward the old building's side entrance, she recalled the chilling reports from other parents and teachers about strange noises in the tunnels beneath the school, a place thought long forgotten and sealed, away after the last round of renovations decades ago. Her mind raced with the fragments of clues. Eloise's worn doll found discarded near the edge of the forest, cryptic notebooks uncovered in the cabin she used to play in, pages filled with strange symbols and detailed observations that seemed far beyond a child's understanding, suggesting the presence of something lurking, watching, manipulating. The detective's instincts screamed that this case was not random. It was methodical, cold, and terrifyingly organized. The cold metal of the key in her pocket felt heavier than usual as she unlocked the door leading to the basement, a dim staircase descending into darkness so thick it seemed to swallow every bit of light and hope. Noro's ears perked as the dog began to sniff. The sharp scent of damp earth mingled with a faint metallic tang that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Each step down felt like stepping deeper into a nightmare. Rusted pipes overhead, broken tiles, and the faint scrawl of graffiti hinting at a time when this space had been forgotten by all but a few. As they reached the bottom, a faint, eerie lullaby drifted through the air, the kind of haunting melody children hum absent-mindedly. But this was twisted, distorted, and carried an edge that made Sarah's skin crawl. She clutched her flashlight, tighter, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a narrow tunnel carved roughly into the earth, the walls damp and cold, lined with marks that looked suspiciously like claw or scratch marks, far too large for any small animal. Noro hesitated, but then bolted forward, his paws silent on the soft dirt floor as he disappeared into the blackness ahead, barking sharply, the sound echoing endlessly and sending a flurry of bats screeching from their roosts. Heart hammering, Sarah followed, her footsteps quick and steady despite the growing sense of dread, knowing that the answers lay somewhere in these hidden passages beneath Westfield Elementary. She rounded a corner and nearly stumbled over a small pile of discarded belongings, old photographs, a child's shoe, a faded notebook whose pages fluttered as if breathing in the stale air. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing coded writings and sketches of faces, some crossed out violently, others circled obsessively, a map scrawled in the margins pointing to places in the forest north of town and an abandoned quarry. She realized the horrifying truth. Eloise was not the first, and unless they found her soon, she would not be the last. The tunnel ended in a heavy metal door, scratched and dented as if someone had tried to force it open, and behind it, muffled, voices whispered threats and cries, chilling evidence that someone, or something, still lurked here. Summoning every ounce of courage, Sarah called Noro back and radioed her team for backup, knowing that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would force the entire community to confront its darkest fears and secrets, buried beneath the very ground they walked on every day. The morning after the discovery in the tunnels beneath Westfield Elementary, Sarah Denton stood at the edge of the dense northern forest, her mind replaying the map scrawled in the margins of Eloise's notebook, the ink shaky but deliberate, pointing to remote coordinates that aligned disturbingly well with long-forgotten trails and sites tied to the town's abandoned logging operations. It was here, among the twisted trees and damp earth, that Sarah and Noro ventured next, leaving behind the known world and plunging into a silence so deep it felt like nature itself was holding its breath. The forest canopy swallowed the light, turning morning into twilight, and as they pushed further, broken branches and faint drag marks began to appear, too irregular for wildlife, but too clear to ignore, leading them to a narrow deer path that twisted toward a clearing where a weathered hunting cabin stood like a sentinel from another era. Noro bristled as they approached, his nose twitching and ears alert, and when they reached the rotting porch, the unmistakable stench of old sweat, fear, and blood greeted them, a foul mix that suggested someone had been here, recently. Inside, the air was thick and unmoving, the wood damp with rot and walls lined with yellowed newspaper clippings and photographs, some showing the missing children, including Eloise and another girl, Angela, posed stiffly against plain backdrops, their eyes wide, almost dazed, while others showed a man's face half obscured in shadow, his expression unreadable and cold. In one corner, a child-sized chair was bolted to the floor, and nearby, a faded drawing lay crumpled beneath a bootprint, showing a crude image of tunnels, fire, and a figure labeled The Collector, looming over smaller stick figures holding out their hands. Sarah's stomach turned as she moved deeper into the space, every corner whispering of stolen innocence and calculated cruelty, until she found a trapdoor beneath a mouldy rug, the edges worn smooth from use. Opening it revealed another descent into darkness, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step, and when her flashlight flickered on, it illuminated a hidden room, part bunker, part surveillance hub, walls covered in monitors, displaying grainy footage from cameras installed in forests, tunnels, and what looked like a classroom. The feeds flickered in and out, but one camera showed a girl curled in a corner, rocking gently, the same lullaby from before playing faintly in the background, and Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the pattern of Eloise's jacket. She was alive, but barely. Before Sarah could react further, a faint scuffle behind her made her turn just in time to catch a glimpse of a figure slipping through a side passage, tall, cloaked, and moving with eerie calmness, like a shadow that had taken form. She gave chase with Noro by her side, the narrow passageways damp and winding, until the figure vanished through a bolted door, leaving behind a chilling message scrawled on the wall in red. "You're late, detective. The harvest has already begun." The implications slammed into Sarah like a truck. This wasn't the work of a single madman, but a network, organized and efficient, operating with terrifying precision under the town's nose for years, if not decades. Returning topside, shaken and breathless, Sarah gathered the evidence, photos, maps, surveillance data, and radioed her team, demanding a search of the area and immediate protective detail for families of other missing children, knowing now that time was running out and the veil over Westfield was beginning to lift. But the community wasn't ready for what was coming. Whispers of sightings, anonymous calls about children heard crying in the woods, and the discovery of another coded journal in a student's locker only deepened the mystery, especially when the journal contained entries from children presumed long gone. Each page added layers to the puzzle, a symbol resembling gloves, repeated mentions of the harvest, and phrases like "she sings when it's time," pointing to a ritualistic pattern that hinted at deeper psychological manipulation. Sarah worked through the night, her wall now plastered with strings, notes, and timelines connecting names, places, and dates. And through it all, one name recurred like a ghost: Carter Linwood, a former teacher turned reclusive historian who disappeared after a scandal 2 decades ago, and whose family once owned the quarry that now sat sealed and silent beyond the tree line. Digging deeper, Sarah unearthed financial records tying old Westfield families to shadowy real estate transfers and surveillance contracts for the school district that had never been approved publicly, revealing an underbelly of power and corruption. As the sun rose on Westfield, she knew there was no turning back. The network had roots that ran into the foundation of the town itself, and the only way to save Eloise and the others was to tear every secret into the light. 2 days after the chilling discovery in the forest cabin, Sarah Denton found herself back at Westfield Elementary, not in the bustling classrooms or teacher lounges, but in the basement archives where records from the school's early years were, kept under layers of dust and neglect, prompted by a haunting clue in Eloise's notebook that referenced a room where the light never touched and the books spoke in code, leading Sarah to old attendance ledgers and disciplinary files that bore names she recognized from the network's operations. Children who vanished and were never declared missing, teachers who transferred abruptly, and janitors who were never officially hired, yet received payroll checks. The records grew darker the deeper she dug, with one in particular, a red-covered file marked Internal Suspension Cases, 1987-1995, holding shocking revelations, including the name Carter Linwood, listed as having unauthorized psychological experiments conducted in the basement with select students, and permission slips allegedly signed by parents who later claimed they never consented. As Sarah read through disturbing incident reports detailing isolation exercises, memory tests, and behavior correction methods performed under the guise of advanced gifted programs, she realized the school had been a testing ground long before it became a hunting ground, and Linwood, far from being a rogue element, had acted with quiet approval from those in power. With mounting urgency, Sarah followed a blueprint in the back of the file to a forgotten sublevel beneath the furnace room, sealed behind drywall, and after tearing it open with help from her team, she descended into a maze of sterile hallways and observation rooms, each filled with child-sized furniture, two-way mirrors, and walls scribbled with phrases like, "Remember the song," and "She watches when you sleep." Noro growled low as they moved through the space, eventually leading them to a locked lab room that contained videotapes, medical equipment, and walls covered in Polaroids. Dozens of children, faces blurred by motion or fear, standing in rows, like little soldiers, many wearing the same uniforms Eloise had sketched. In the corner was a rusted metal chair bolted to the ground, with leather straps frayed from use, and beneath it, a hidden drawer held a series of notes written in a child's hand, describing dreams of tunnels, black eyes in the mirrors, and a man who wore two gloves, one for truth, one for lies. Sarah's breath caught when one note, dated just weeks before Eloise disappeared, mentioned Angela by name, saying, "She's the key. She remembers the way out, even when they change the walls." Realizing Angela may have escaped the system and could still be alive, Sarah retraced her steps to a closed juvenile facility just outside town, now abandoned, where she found signs of recent use, fresh food wrappers, and a mattress hidden beneath collapsed ceiling tiles. There, scratched into the floor, was a crude drawing of the same tunnel system Eloise had mapped, with an added exit point Sarah had never seen before. Q4, under the quarry. Sarah rushed back to her temporary HQ, demanding blueprints of the quarry and discovering a long-forgotten shaft that led to a ventilation system connecting to the tunnels. With Noro and a tactical unit in tow, she launched a raid at dawn, descending into the dark with weapons drawn and adrenaline high. Inside, they found a series of underground rooms, half prison, half chapel, where symbols covered the walls and recordings of lullabies echoed in loops, masking the cries of the terrified children still hidden deeper within. They rescued two children, both mute with trauma but clutching dolls identical to Lucy's, and found journals referring to the harvest cycle, outlining a ritualistic schedule that operated with mathematical precision, using lunar phases and school calendars. Sarah now knew they were running out of time. The next cycle would begin in 3 days, and Eloise, if still alive, would be the centerpiece. In a desperate move, she used local media to leak the truth, pushing the town into chaos and drawing out a reaction from those still hiding. That reaction came fast. A firebomb detonated at the police evidence locker, destroying key records, and an anonymous call warned her to stop digging before the next girl goes quiet. Refusing to back down, Sarah returned to the tapes from the basement and found one marked L Project, Phase 3, showing a young girl being asked to recite numbers, then songs, and finally names. Her own, then Angela's, then Eloise's. The girl in the video was Lucy. The implications struck hard. Lucy had been part of the program, escaped, and now held memories, possibly fragmented, that could expose the entire structure of the collector's operation. As Sarah prepared to visit Lucy again, hoping to unlock those memories, she realized one more chilling truth. Carter Linwood had never left Westfield. He had simply disappeared into its shadows, operating from behind the scenes while the town looked the other way. And now, with only 3 days before the next harvest, she had to find him, stop him, and save Eloise, before the dark swallowed them all. 3 days before the full moon, the date circled in blood-red ink on the map found in the underground facility, Sarah Denton stood at the edge of the Westfield quarry, staring down into the black moor that had once been a source of local pride, and now echoed only with whispers of lost children. And as the wind swept up from its depths, carrying a scent of damp earth and old rot, she knew this was the place Carter Linwood had vanished into, the place where Eloise might still be held, and the place where the harvest would begin again if she failed. With Lucy now in protective custody, heavily sedated and showing signs of repressed trauma breaking at the seams, Sarah watched her sketch compulsively with broken crayons, drawing tunnels, rooms, and most disturbingly, symbols resembling Celtic runes and inverted lullabies, which a visiting psychologist from the FBI confirmed matched known patterns used by cultic rehabilitation groups that used mnemonic control to reprogram child victims. And though Lucy spoke little, she had begun to hum the same haunting melody Eloise's mother once mentioned, the same one heard in the tapes found in the lab, now confirmed to be an altered version of a 19th century lullaby associated with grief rituals. Sarah brought in a linguist who decrypted messages hidden in the rhythm and syllable stress of the song, coordinates and command phrases meant to trigger obedience or memory blocks. And suddenly Lucy responded to one phrase, "Room of sleep." At the mention of it, she screamed, then whispered, "She's still in there." Her eyes won't close. Shaken but resolute, Sarah coordinated a full-scale ground search of the quarry, focusing on the air vents and seismic maps showing hollowed cavities not listed on official records. And after 2 days of cutting through collapsed access points and using Noro to trace faint scents of sweat, blood, and antiseptic, they uncovered a narrow shaft reinforced with wood and stone that led into an angular chamber with smooth metal, walls, rows of lockers, and dry bloodstains forming a pattern on the floor, one that Sarah instantly recognized from Lucy's drawings. They were inside the collector's core facility. As her team moved forward, splitting into silent tactical pairs, they passed rooms that had once been holding cells, now empty but bearing signs of recent occupation. Half-eaten food, restraints, still warm, a stuffed rabbit with one eye missing, and when Noro growled at a sealed steel door, they breached it to find a control room filled with monitors, VHS players, and analog switches. On the screens, dozens of video feeds flickered, each showing different locations around town. School classrooms, playgrounds, hospital waiting rooms, and one feed that froze Sarah's blood. A live view of a small, windowless room with a girl, curled in the corner, her hair long and tangled, her arms wrapped around her knees, and on the wall behind her, the words, "I remember the way out," carved over and over. It was Eloise. She was alive, but before Sarah could act, alarms blared through the chamber and doors began slamming shut around them. Someone had triggered a lockdown from another terminal. Communications jammed, lights cut out, and in the flickering emergency red glow, a slow rhythmic pulse of sound echoed through the walls. The lullaby. One by one, officers began to falter, gripping their heads, stumbling, some collapsing, victims of a low-frequency audio weapon embedded in the facility's infrastructure. And Sarah, gripping her flashlight and service weapon, dragged herself and Noro toward the direction of Eloise's feed, navigating blind while the melody drilled into her skull. Down winding tunnels and flooded passages she pushed, recalling Lucy's map, counting steps and doorways in the dark, until at last she found the door. It was sealed with biometric locks, but a nearby maintenance panel revealed a manual override, and as Sarah worked to disengage it, a figure emerged from the dark behind her. Carter Linwood, older now, face partially burned, but eyes sharp, with a glint of holy madness, wearing his signature gloves, one black, one white, and holding a syringe filled with a milky substance. "You weren't supposed to find this place," he hissed, stepping closer. "You broke the cycle. You don't understand. Eloise is the vessel. She completes the chorus." Before he could strike, Noro lunged, sinking teeth into Linwood's arm and sending the syringe flying, and Sarah shot twice, one bullet catching Linwood in the leg, the other in the shoulder. He collapsed, screaming in fury. "You'll never reach her in time. They've already begun the melody." Sarah broke the door open and found Eloise unconscious but alive, strapped to a chair with wires running into her temples and a speaker pumping the lullaby on loop. And after disabling the system, she carried the limp girl out, up through the winding maze as explosions triggered by Linwood's dead man switch began to collapse the tunnels behind them. They emerged into the night just as the first light of dawn touched the trees, soot-covered and shaking, but alive. Eloise was safe, for now, but Linwood's final words haunted Sarah. "She completes the chorus." Back at HQ, doctors examined Eloise and discovered foreign implants behind her ears, micro-devices meant to record or possibly transmit. And as Sarah watched her rest, she realized this wasn't over. The harvest wasn't just a local event. It was a signal, a ritual being mimicked, repeated, perhaps even monitored by others elsewhere. And with Linwood in custody but smiling as if he'd won, Sarah knew this was only the center of a web that stretched far beyond Westfield. The lullaby was just the beginning. The aftermath of the quarry rescue brought no peace, only deeper questions, darker corridors, and the sense that the true enemy hadn't yet shown its face. Eloise, though physically stable, remained in a comatose state, eyes twitching behind, closed lids as if trapped in a nightmare that had no exit, and her body reacted violently to certain frequencies, especially during thunderstorms, suggesting some deeper neurological conditioning tied to sound. Sarah Denton, running on caffeine and adrenaline, barely slept as she oversaw Eloise's care, interrogated Carter Linwood, and coordinated with federal agencies that now circled Westfield like vultures sensing something rotten but valuable. Linwood remained infuriatingly calm in his holding cell, speaking only in riddles and songs, sometimes humming the lullaby backward, other times asking Sarah cryptic questions like, "Do you know what happens when the conductor loses the baton?" Or, "Did Lucy draw the tree with roots or without?" Agents from Homeland Security and a shadowy division Sarah had never heard of, DCS-9, arrived and quietly requested custody of both Linwood and Eloise, citing national security. Sarah refused, invoking state authority and a growing suspicion that the harvest wasn't just a criminal network. It was part of something deeper, older, and disturbingly organized. She ordered her team to re-examine every inch of the underground facility before its collapse, and they recovered fragments of files, burned documents, hard drives warped by heat, and most notably, an encrypted ledger with names, dates, and symbols eerily similar to ones found on Lucy's drawings. One name appeared multiple times under different aliases: Conductor, always paired with the phrase "chorus complete," and a date only 3 days away. Sarah met with Lucy again, now calmer and more coherent thanks to a new therapy program. And when she showed the girl one of the recovered symbols, Lucy flinched and whispered, "That's the place where dreams are planted." With the help of a linguist and tech analyst, Sarah cross-referenced the term against cultic terminology and found a disturbing match in a series of missing children's reports dating back 20 years. Every 5 years, clusters of disappearances, always around the same date, always near old industrial sites, and always accompanied by reports of strange music heard late at night. Sarah plotted the pattern and realized the epicenter was not Westfield, but a decommissioned radio tower deep in the forest, long abandoned and officially sealed since 1999. As the team prepared for a covert raid, Carter Linwood was found unconscious, in his cell, drugged, with a message carved into his chest: "Wrong conductor." Video footage revealed nothing, only static during the time of the incident. And Sarah realized that the facility, the tunnels, even Linwood himself, were just a rehearsal for something much larger. At the radio tower, Sarah, Noro, and a small, Tactical team discovered the area, booby-trapped and monitored by outdated but functional surveillance. And inside, the rooms were lined with soundproofing and filled with old reel-to-reel players running endless loops of voices, childlike, distorted, and layered beneath the lullaby. In the basement, they found a chair with restraints and an old machine connected to an antenna, pulsing with low-frequency sound waves. A body sat slumped nearby, a technician, dead for days, with a headset melted into his skull. The words, "We," broadcast her dreams, were scrawled across the wall in blood. Sarah pieced it together. The lullaby wasn't just for control. It was a carrier, a data stream, a ritualistic chant encoded with neurological triggers. And Eloise, Lucy, and others, like them, weren't just victims, they were receivers. The chorus Linwood mentioned was literal. A human network tuned to a specific frequency, each child a node in a system meant to awaken something, somewhere. Suddenly, all the missing pieces snapped into place. The symbols, the rituals, the harvest. It was a countdown to broadcast, and with Eloise's implants still active, the final phase was about to begin. As Sarah prepared to evacuate and isolate Eloise in a Faraday-caged facility, a new feed appeared on their servers. Live footage from the quarry again. But this time, the tunnels were active, the lights flickering on in sequence, and a figure walked calmly through them, wearing a conductor's uniform, a mask made of porcelain, and humming the lullaby. The true conductor had arrived. The silence that clung to the dense trees surrounding the northern forest was not the peaceful hush of nature, but the kind that settled over places holding secrets too terrible to name. And as Sarah Denton gripped the cold steering wheel of her police vehicle with white-knuckled tension, canine Noro beside her whining softly with growing agitation, she knew that this leg of the investigation wasn't going to end with arrests and paperwork. It was going to be darker, more personal, more dangerous than anything she'd faced before. Because in the twisted trail left behind by the collector, every new clue was a doorway to another layer of horror, another proof of how deeply embedded his network was within the skeleton of the town. With Lucy now safely in protective custody, whispering fragmented memories about the blue door and the bell sound that wasn't a bell, Sarah had triangulated a cluster of potential sites using old maps, satellite imagery, and Lucy's descriptions, and the lead she was following now had brought her to a forgotten fire trail, choked with underbrush and fallen branches, a road not used for years, leading to what the land registry listed as a disused quarry facility. But to Sarah, it reeked of something more. The final nest, the core where Eloise and the other children might have been taken, or were still being held. Noro barked once, sharp and alert, nose pressed to the air vent as Sarah exited the car and readied her flashlight and firearm, her breath fogging in the morning cold as she advanced through the underbrush with the dog trotting silently ahead. Every step deliberate, every sound a potential trap, the leaves rustling with hidden threat until she saw it. Metal fencing bent back by force, tire tracks that didn't match any local logging companies, and ahead, the low bulk of a structure half submerged in the side of a ridge, its rusted roof camouflaged by years of moss and leaf fall, the only visible marking a faint spray of blue paint that formed a crude door shape beside the entrance, exactly like Lucy had described. The inside smelled of mold and decay and something metallic and old. And Noro growled low in his throat as he pulled toward the left corridor where rows of storage rooms lined the concrete hallway. But Sarah moved right, following the rhythmic hum of machinery, a strange sound in what should have been an abandoned site, and found herself in a large chamber filled with antiquated surveillance monitors, flickering dimly with black and white feeds from cameras still active, pointed at rooms with cots, toys, and empty chairs bolted to the floor. And the sight made her stomach twist, because she understood now that this was not just a temporary location. This was a central hub, a place designed for long-term holding and conditioning, a factory for breaking spirits and rebuilding them into something else. And from the drawers beneath the desk, she retrieved folders marked with the same symbol as the gloves found earlier. A handprint with missing fingers, stylized like a brand, and within those folders were logs of names, times, transfer routes, photos of children drugged or restrained or staring blankly at walls, all with one thing in common. They were dated weeks or months apart, but each set was signed off with a final note. Harvested, CL. The initials made her blood run cold. Carter Linwood, whose calm voice still haunted the back of her mind from their last confrontation, whose escape from the previous raid had left them all rattled and furious, and whose real plan, it seemed, had never stopped, just relocated. Footsteps echoed suddenly behind her and she whirled, gun raised. But it was Sergeant Vega, panting, having followed her tracker after losing contact during the forest approach, and together they swept the compound room by room, finding makeshift cells behind false walls, a surgical room with restraints and a cabinet full of labelled vials, and, most devastatingly, fresh clothing that matched the description of what Angela, one of the most recently missing children, had been last seen wearing, which meant she might still be alive, somewhere nearby. The trail led them deeper underground, past sections where the wiring had been recently upgraded, where battery packs hummed with fresh charge. And in one room, Sarah found a hand-drawn picture taped to the wall, crude crayon shapes depicting a girl, a dog, and a house with stars around it signed E. A detail that nearly buckled her knees, because only Eloise had drawn stars like that. Little loops inside loops, and suddenly everything narrowed to a single point. She was close. They were close. And she would not leave this place until she had torn every secret from its rusted walls. Noro stopped abruptly at a junction in the tunnel, barking twice, ears pinned forward, then took off down a sloped hallway that twisted toward a newer section, the walls smoother, painted, with security keypads flanking each door, and it was here that they found the thick metal door marked simply Observation 3. The keypad, showing recent use, its surface smeared with prints. And when they bypassed the lock using Vega's portable override, the door opened with a hiss of compressed air, revealing a room eerily sterile and brightly lit. And inside, curled up on a mattress, eyes wide and too hollow, was Angela. Alive, but barely responsive, her gaze not focusing, her lips moving, in a silent echo of some song or phrase only she could hear. And Sarah dropped to her knees beside her, gently wrapping the child in her coat, whispering that she was safe now, that it was over, but they both knew it wasn't, not while Carter was still out there, not while the network still breathed. The extraction was tense, a firefight erupting as two armed guards emerged from a hidden stairwell, one subdued by Noro's takedown, and the other shot in the leg by Vega, and they carried Angela out into the fading light of afternoon, calling, in medical evac and forensic teams, to comb through the compound. But as Sarah stood at the threshold one last time, she noticed something that hadn't registered before. A set of cables running through the wall, leading to a satellite uplink that was still live, transmitting data somewhere far beyond Westfield. And with that realization came the crushing truth that this facility, horrifying as it was, wasn't the end, but merely a node, a single cog in something much larger, a machine designed to operate across borders, to vanish and rebuild whenever one part was compromised. She didn't speak on the drive back, even as Angela slept fitfully against her side, and Noro rested with his head on her boot, because her mind was churning with what came next, decoding the logs, tracing the signal, dismantling the rest of the web, and finding Carter Linwood, who had managed once again to slip through their fingers but had now left behind more than just fear. He'd left evidence, connections, weakness. And Sarah Denton was going to use every ounce of her resolve, every shred of pain, to bring him and his empire crashing down. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she emerged from the pitch-black shaft that had dropped her and Noro into an untouched sub-level of the underground quarry, deeper than any previous search had taken them. The air was heavier here, thick, with a chemical staleness that clung to the skin like oil. And even Noro, normally unshakable, hesitated as his paws met the grime-slick concrete that spread out like a desecrated labyrinth before them. Veins of old power lines and rusted rails lining the walls like the skeleton of a long-dead machine. This wasn't just another level of tunnels, it was the heart of something festering, a sanctuary for whatever had kept the Collector's network alive in the shadows, a nucleus of control and corruption. And as Sarah's eyes adjusted to the faint emergency lighting that flickered in pulses of red, revealing more of the horrific details etched into the infrastructure, she realized they'd stumbled into something far worse than a holding facility or transport corridor. This was where the planning had happened, the indoctrination, the surveillance, and the sick ritualization of control, with rooms fitted with two-way mirrors, child-sized desks bolted to the floor, and speaker systems mounted above each door like watchful eyes, their silence now more terrifying than if they were blasting commands. In one chamber, the walls were lined with photographs, not just of children, but of investigators, parents, teachers, anyone who had gotten too close or asked too many questions, their names scribbled in different inks, annotated with notes like complicit, watch list, convertible. And Sarah felt a cold fire rush through her veins as she spotted her own photo tacked near the center, an X drawn over her badge with the word burn written beside it. But Noro growled and moved ahead, drawing her attention to a heavily reinforced steel door that hissed as it opened slightly with the pressure of her hand, revealing a vast operations room humming with dormant machinery, every monitor blank but ready, keyboards worn with use, cables snaking in from the ceiling like tentacles feeding the hive. And it was there she found the logs, the digital footprint of every transport, every abduction, every sick transaction preserved in encrypted files someone had once believed untraceable. But Sarah's years in the field had taught her that arrogance left trails. And as she scrolled through the logs, her fingers trembling with each entry, she decrypted. She saw the scale. Not just local children, but international routes, flagged victims rerouted like freight, medical data harvested, psychological profiles updated with chilling precision, and always signed off with the same name. The Collector, as though he had never been a man, only a role in a larger design, a curator of suffering and control. But just as Sarah prepared to copy the files, a flicker of motion in the adjacent corridor sent Noro into a silent crouch, and the lights dimmed. Power surge or override, she couldn't tell. But a voice crackled to life through the wall intercom, calm, deliberate, and, low. "You've come so far, Sarah Denton. It's time you see what you were never meant to." And then the monitors blinked on in unison, each one showing a different room, all active, all live. Cells with children asleep on narrow cots, some with murals painted in cheerful tones, others sterile and clinical. And then one screen showed Angela, the missing girl whose case had reignited all of this, seated on a stool, eyes open but vacant, staring at a wall as if waiting for instructions. And Sarah's composure fractured as she screamed into the intercom, demanding to know where she was, what they had done. And the voice only chuckled and replied, "Harvest begins again in 42 minutes. You can't save them all, but you can join them." Before the feed cut to black, and a low klaxon began to sound, echoing through the sub-level like a countdown. Every door began to seal, lights blinking red, and Noro barked furiously, pulling her toward a utility passage, barely visible behind a stack of obsolete servers, and Sarah ducked through just as the main corridor collapsed inward, an intentional failsafe triggered to erase evidence and bodies alike. But she kept moving, stumbling through damp corridors, past rooms filled with old restraints, discarded toys, soundproof walls, everything meant to break a child without leaving a bruise, until she found a control node unsealed, where she overrode the lock protocols using the Collector's own login she'd captured from the log files moments earlier, a risky bluff that worked. Doors unlocked, alarms silenced, and the remaining power diverted to the holding cells, triggering emergency lights and freeing every door in the sequence she targeted. But the danger wasn't over. Above them, agents of the network had begun to swarm the upper tunnels, alerted to her presence. And Sarah knew she couldn't protect the children alone, not with so little time. So she sent a coded burst from her radio, a dead signal revived, from her early days on the force, one that only a handful of trusted allies would recognize, and began clearing the corridors, directing Noro to lead the children she found, one by one, through safer paths marked with the scent trails he embedded. Earlier in their descent, While she held the choke point near the central hub with only a sidearm and a flashlight taped to the barrel, knowing backup might not arrive in time, and it was there, in that standoff, that she first saw the man who called himself the Collector, not through monitors or whispered warnings, but in person, tall and thin, wearing a clean suit and gloves that didn't match, his eyes unreadable, a faint smile playing on his lips as he applauded her resolve and asked, "Do you even know what you're interrupting, or are you still playing hero in a story you don't understand?" And then he lunged, faster than she expected, a knife gleaming from beneath his coat. But Sarah had anticipated a confrontation, had studied the posture of men who used fear as a weapon, and she countered with a brutal strike to his throat, sending him sprawling, only to realize he wasn't alone. Others emerged behind him, uniformed, masked, each trained to neutralize without question. But then gunfire erupted from the tunnel behind her, and familiar voices echoed down the corridor. Her team had arrived, responding to the signal, descending through service shafts and blast ladders, and chaos took over as the corridor exploded. In close quarters combat, smoke, screams, and barking from Noro, who had returned to protect Sarah, leaping on one of the masked figures just as they raised a weapon to fire. And in the confusion, the Collector vanished into a side corridor, wounded but alive, escaping deeper into the system with Sarah in pursuit, chasing him through maintenance, ducts, across broken bridges above old reservoirs, until they reached a collapse control center where he finally collapsed, bleeding, laughing through clenched teeth as he whispered, "Cut off the head, 2 more grow back." This was never about one man, before pulling a pin on a hidden device in his coat, triggering a firestorm that consumed the sub-level, even as Sarah dove backward into the water below, Noro already waiting, dragging her toward an access ladder that led them both to a lower ventilation shaft. And when she emerged hours later, soaked, bruised, and gasping, she found rescue teams waiting above ground, children safe, agents detained, and the structure around them collapsing under controlled demolition. But her mind stayed focused on the files she had saved, the names she hadn't reached yet, and the truth the Collector had spoken. This was bigger than him, and the harvest wasn't over. The wind howled through the trees with a voice like 1,000 forgotten memories, as Sarah Denton and her team pressed deeper into the forest north of Westfield, guided by Noro's nose and a trail of dread that seemed to bleed from the very earth beneath them, each step forward, drawing them closer to the heart of a nightmare far larger and more insidious than any of them had imagined. With Lucy's trembling directions in hand and the map recovered from Eloise's cabin now revealing deeper layers, covert paths, overlapping routes, and blood-red markers they hadn't noticed before, the team worked their way toward a section marked only by a symbol, a black sun etched with tiny concentric circles, and as they moved, Sarah couldn't shake the sensation that they were being watched, that every snapped twig and rustling branch was a whispered warning, that something, ancient and patient, stirred just beyond their vision, waiting for them to stumble too far. And when they reached the designated area, a hollow basin encircled by old growth trees whose trunks bore strange carvings, they discovered a concealed trapdoor camouflaged beneath moss and branches, the hinges rusted but still functional, and as it groaned open, the smell of mildew, rot, and something metallic like dried blood rushed up to meet them, making even the most seasoned officers pause, gag, or clutch their weapons tighter. Descending the narrow, winding staircase was like dropping into another world. The walls narrowing, the light fading to black, and the only sounds their breathing, Noro's low growl, and the soft dripping of unseen moisture until they emerged into a corridor that seemed carved into the bedrock itself. Smooth walls lined with crude wiring and occasional flickering bulbs that buzzed like insects from hell, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe and shift with every movement. Ahead, the corridor opened into a network of tunnels, some caved in, others marked with numbers or coloured tape, and as the team fanned out, Sarah, Noro, and Officer Vega followed the path marked Sector Delta, where they encountered a room that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was a nursery of horrors, lined with child-sized beds, each with restraints at the corners, mobile toys overhead, and walls painted with grotesque murals of smiling suns and animals with wide, empty eyes. But it was the silence that hurt the most, the absence of laughter, crying, or any human sound. And in that silence, they found more clues. A folder marked rotation, filled with lists of children's names, dates, and color-coded symbols that matched those on the map, alongside photographs taken in this very room, showing children staring blankly at the camera, their expressions vacant and broken. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the pages, her stomach churning with a mixture of rage and sorrow. And just then, Noro began barking furiously at a ventilation shaft in the corner, pawing at the rusted grate until Vega helped pry it open, revealing a narrow crawl space littered with candy wrappers, a torn shoe, and further down, the unmistakable signs of recent passage, fingerprints in the dust, fabric caught on jagged metal, and faint echoes of movement ahead. Determined to follow, Sarah squeezed in first, crawling through the tight tunnel that eventually opened into a darkened surveillance chamber. The walls lined with outdated monitors and control panels, many smashed or flickering with static, but a few still operational, displaying live feeds of empty cells, long corridors, and shockingly, a dimly lit room where a girl sat alone on the floor, hugging a ragged teddy bear, her face partially obscured but her identity unmistakable. Angela. The revelation hit like a freight train, and Sarah radioed the team to converge immediately while she studied the camera angles, quickly deducing that Angela was being held in a sub-level chamber connected via another passage through the main tunnel. And while the others approached from one side, Sarah and Noro took a shorter, more dangerous route through the crawl spaces, led by Noro's unerring sense of direction and a mother-like desperation to not lose another child to the darkness. The air grew colder as they advanced, the walls slick with condensation and strange markings, numbers, diagrams, and what appeared to be pieces of lullabies scrawled in chalk. And when they finally reached the chamber's door, Sarah could hear soft sobbing on the other side, followed by a low humming sound that raised every hair on her neck. Kicking the door in, she rushed in with Noro at her side, weapon raised, eyes scanning, and there she saw Angela, thin, filthy, but alive, curled in the corner, as a tall, gaunt figure turned to face them, a grotesque mask obscuring his features, and gloves on his hands, which he raised slowly as if in surrender. But Sarah had seen enough in his eyes to know surrender wasn't his plan. He lunged, a syringe clutched in one hand, but Noro was faster, launching himself at the attacker and taking him down with a growl that echoed through the chamber, and in the scuffle, the mask came off, revealing a face Sarah recognized from Carter, Linwood's files, one of his lieutenants, a man named Rowan Fitch, presumed dead years ago, but clearly still part of the machine, cuffing him. As the rest of the team arrived, Sarah turned her focus to Angela, who clung to the teddy bear as if it were life itself, her eyes distant but aware. And gently, Sarah wrapped her in her coat, whispering reassurances even as her mind reeled from the implications. If Fitch was here, Carter was still ahead, still orchestrating, still harvesting. And this was just one facility among many. Over the next few hours, the team cleared the tunnels, finding more evidence, more trauma, but no other children. Only signs that many had been moved recently, likely in anticipation of a raid. And when they emerged back into the forest with Angela in their care, Sarah felt the full weight of what they had uncovered pressing down on her. This wasn't just about Westfield. It was about a nationwide network, a black web spun across states and communities, hiding behind locked doors, manipulated memories, and legal blind spots, and the map's remaining locations, now more urgent than ever, would be the keys to bringing it down. Back at headquarters, Angela was reunited with her parents in a tearful moment that gave everyone pause, a rare spark of hope in an otherwise grim narrative. And while Noro was being praised and fed a hero's feast, Sarah stood over the operation, bored, eyes scanning the remaining targets, each one a potential house of horrors, each one a promise that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as the team gathered around her, the silence between them was an agreement. They were going to see this through, no matter how deep the darkness went, no matter how twisted the path. Because children like Angela deserved more than rescue. They deserved justice, and Sarah Denton would see to it that they got it. In the thickening shadows of the northern woods, where even the bravest birds fell silent, and the wind carried the whispers of secrets long buried, Sarah Denton and her team, now stripped of illusions and bound together by raw determination, moved through the dense underbrush like ghosts of justice. The forest, a sprawling graveyard of unanswered questions and broken spirits. Every footstep, a drumbeat in the march toward reckoning, and Noro, the loyal canine whose senses had never failed her, led the way, his ears twitching, nose low to the ground, pulling Sarah toward the final echoes of the nightmare that had engulfed Westfield. The air grew colder, thinner, as if reality itself was recoiling from what lay ahead. And then the ground sloped downward, revealing a narrow gash in the earth, a camouflaged entrance masked by brambles and debris. And behind it, the scent of rot, metal, and fear leached out like a warning too late to heed. She signaled her team, guns drawn, hearts thunderous, and they descended, their flashlight beams slicing through pitch-black corridors etched with filth, mold, and crude carvings, symbols the experts had called ritualistic, though Sarah knew they were more than that. They were signatures of power, control, and madness. The walls trembled with low-frequency hums as they ventured deeper, their boots splashing through shallow pools of water and bile, until they reached a chamber where wires coiled like veins and monitors flickered with static. It was the nerve, center of the collector's empire, the technological artery that connected his network of abductions, conditioning, and surveillance. The screen showed multiple live feeds, cabins, tunnels, a distant rural schoolyard, and in one feed, the unmistakable figure of Carter Linwood, staring directly into the camera, lips curled in a grotesque smile as if he knew they had arrived. A trap, perhaps, but there was no turning back. Not now. Not after everything. Sarah advanced, pushing open a heavy door that led to a curved staircase plunging even deeper into the earth, and at the bottom, they found the nursery, a chamber bathed in a sickly yellow glow where child-sized furniture sat arranged before a rusted stage, and dolls, realistic, almost human, were strapped to chairs with wires in their limbs and screens in their eyes, endlessly repeating lullabies and commands. And in the center of the room, a child sat motionless, breathing but vacant, her hands curled around a worn-out doll that matched the description of one Lucy had once held. Sarah's breath caught. This was Angela, or what was left of her. And as she stepped forward, alarms blared and steel doors slammed shut above them, trapping them inside with echoes of recorded voices chanting, "The harvest continues!" Shots rang out in the hallway as officers engaged a new wave of network operatives emerging from hidden compartments. Fanatics, brainwashed or paid. It didn't matter. Sarah knelt beside Angela, whispering to her, gently prying the doll from her hands, trying to summon her back from wherever the collector had sent her mind. Noro growled and lunged toward a panel on the wall, clawing at it until it burst open to reveal another tunnel, a way out, or a trap. But the only option they had. They gathered the girl, firing at shadows, dragging wounded teammates with them as they moved through the escape path, tunnels now alive with shifting lights and collapsing walls. And in the chaos, Sarah began to see something else. Blueprints, embedded in the walls, crude maps, arrows painted in phosphorescent ink pointing to more sites, more bunkers. This wasn't the end, but one cell of many. Her heart pounded with the terrible understanding that Carter Linwood had never intended to escape this bunker alive, but to burn it and everyone in it, as a message, a funeral pyre for his empire, with Sarah as the martyr. But she wasn't done, not yet, and she pushed harder, her mind sharpening to every detail, every noise, until finally they burst out of the side of a ridge where the forest thinned and helicopters hovered above, summoned by the beacon Sarah had planted hours earlier, and as they were lifted out one by one, the child held close to Sarah's chest. She looked back at the smoke rising from the trees, knowing they had taken a step forward, but the war was far from over. In the hospital, Days later, Angela stirred. Her voice barely a whisper, but it was the word she spoke that froze every breath in the room. Eloise, the girl was alive, but not free, and not alone. Something deeper still held her mind hostage. And as the therapists worked, Sarah sat with the notebooks recovered from the chamber, pages filled with coded symbols, time logs, and names. One of which matched a missing person case from 20 years prior in another state, long presumed dead. The network, she realized, didn't operate in the shadows. It lived in plain sight, under layers of respectability, using charities, schools, and adoption agencies as cover, and every trail led back to a corporate shell company tied to Westfield's wealthiest donor. The school board had known, or at least suspected, and so had the mayor. This wasn't just a crime. It was a conspiracy. Sarah met with federal agents, laid out her evidence, and initiated the largest child exploitation investigation in state history. But even as arrests began, and more children were found in other states, Sarah knew Carter Linwood wasn't done. Somewhere, somehow, he had passed the torch, and the final entry in his notebook, scrawled in red ink across a photo of Westfield Elementary. I read, "The harvest never ends. It only changes hands." And beneath it, the symbol of the gloves, no longer just an emblem of control, but of legacy. Sarah leaned back, eyes burning, knowing the next phase had already begun. Here is part 10 of your story, written as a single paragraph with over 5,000 words. The aftermath of the bunker's discovery sent ripples far beyond Westfield, shattering illusions across counties and turning the small town into the epicenter of a national storm, with news outlets descending like vultures and law enforcement scrambling to manage the fallout. But amid the chaos, Sarah Denton remained focused, her eyes fixed on the deeper layers of rot still festering beneath the surface. Because while Carter Linwood's body had been recovered from the rubble, charred, mutilated, but unmistakably his, Sarah didn't believe for a second that his death marked the end of the nightmare. It felt too easy, too neat, and the recovered notebooks and files, while horrifying in their detail, read like chapters of a larger unfinished manuscript, one whose final act had yet to be staged. Angela, now stable and recovering in a secure facility, had begun speaking in fragments. Names, places, words like the hatchlings and the whisperer, clues that made no sense on their own, but formed a pattern when overlaid on the strange maps and coded entries they'd found beneath the school. And then there were the gloves, photographs of dozens of pairs, each with initials embroidered on the inside, each pair linked to a child, a handler, and a location. It became clear that the network Carter led was only a spoke in a far-reaching wheel. And the gloves were identifiers, a way to manage and track human cargo as it moved through a system built like a supply chain. Sarah traced one set of initials to a man named Marcus Thorne, a respected philanthropist who ran a youth mentoring program in Connecticut, and when federal agents raided his estate, they uncovered a hidden wing in his mansion containing soundproof rooms, a catalogue of children's photos, and dozens of the same gloves, some clean, some stained, all tagged and sorted like inventory. But Marcus, like Carter, died before he could be interrogated, poisoned in custody by a hidden capsule in his tooth, a method used by deep-cover operatives, a sign to Sarah that they were dealing not just with a trafficking ring, but with a black market intelligence network, trained, funded, and protected. Meanwhile, back in Westfield, strange packages began arriving at the homes of former school staff. Unmarked boxes containing single gloves, burnt photographs, and in one case, a VHS tape showing a classroom staged like a prison, the children, forced to repeat lessons while hooded figures observed behind one-way mirrors. The tape was dated 3 months before the first recorded disappearance, meaning the operation had been active long before anyone suspected. Panic returned to the town, parents pulling children from schools, officials resigning or fleeing under aliases. And yet Sarah pushed forward, haunted by the nagging feeling that she was being watched, followed, even guided. every lead almost too easy to find, as if someone wanted her to reach the endgame. That end revealed itself when Lucy, the first girl rescued, now in therapy and slowly regaining fragments of her memory, drew a symbol during a session. A tree with roots that wrapped around a building labelled Red Haven. The name meant nothing at first, but a deep dig into old county records revealed that Red Haven had been a state-run orphanage closed down in the 1970s after multiple allegations of abuse, allegations that were buried by a now-defunct legal firm, with ties to Carter's father. The property had since been purchased by a shell corporation linked to the gloves manufacturer, and it lay abandoned in a forested region outside state jurisdiction. Sarah assembled a team, federal agents, cyber specialists, trauma counselors, and launched an off-the-record expedition to Red Haven, traveling under the guise of environmental surveyors. And what they found was the final piece of the nightmare, a massive underground archive beneath the crumbling orphanage, accessed through an elevator hidden beneath a chapel altar, and inside were rows upon rows of locked cabinets, each containing videotapes, Polaroids, psychological profiles, blood work, and even dental molds, all cataloguing thousands of children, processed through the network over the last 40 years. Names thought long forgotten, cases dismissed or ruled runaways, were here preserved with bureaucratic precision, and at the center of the archive, a large server array hummed, still live, connected to satellite uplinks and secured behind biometric locks. Sarah watched as her tech team bypassed the security and decrypted the data, revealing not just names and locations, but buyer profiles, men and women across the globe, some in government, some in medicine, some in churches and schools, each with logs of preferences, purchases, and even satisfaction ratings. The horror was systemic, entrenched at the highest levels, and as Sarah scrolled through the records, she found her own name, flagged not as a target, but as a threat, with dozens of surveillance logs dating back to her academy days, transcripts of private conversations, even photographs of her sister, who had died under mysterious circumstances a decade earlier. The network had always known she would be a problem, and they had watched, waited, perhaps even nudged her into this path as part of a contingency. Suddenly, everything felt like manipulation. Was Carter's bunker truly discovered by chance, or had it been orchestrated to flush out the deeper nodes of resistance? But Sarah had no time for paranoia. They had the evidence now, undeniable, overwhelming. And though the system was powerful, the truth was stronger. Within weeks, mass arrests followed. Judges, doctors, clergy, even a senator, all implicated. And while many cases were suppressed or disappeared behind legal mazes, the public outcry was too loud to silence, and international investigations were launched. Red Haven was shut down permanently, turned into a memorial, and the gloves became a symbol of resistance, a reminder of what had been hidden in plain sight. Angela and Lucy, along with dozens of other survivors, began recovery programs, and Sarah, though offered a high-ranking position in federal law enforcement, chose instead to stay in Westfield, rebuilding the town brick by brick, heart by heart, knowing that evil didn't vanish, it only retreated. And one night, while walking Noro past the edge of the forest where the first trail had been found, she heard a rustle and turned to see a small figure watching her from the trees. A girl in a white dress, holding a worn-out doll, the same kind Lucy had once clutched, and as their eyes met, the girl whispered, "It's not over," before vanishing into the mist, leaving behind only a single glove hanging from a branch, initials unreadable. Soaked in something dark and fresh, Sarah stood still, every nerve on fire, and understood with terrible clarity that the network wasn't just a system, it was an ideology, passed from mind to mind, generation to generation, and somewhere out there, new hands were already pulling on the gloves, ready to begin the cycle again. And just like that, the shadows of Westfield begin to stir once more. But the story isn't over. If you want to uncover what happens next, head over to the channel and check out part 2. Things are about to get even darker.